this is Mrs. Gabriel. I'm going to go over part 2 of chapter 11, Feeding the World, for AP Environmental Science. In the last section, I left off with the introduction to the Green Revolution, which, remember, the Green Revolution is the increase in food production using new management techniques, such as fertilizers, pesticides, improved irrigation techniques, and use of fertilizers, I said that already, and pesticides. So just remember what I told you about these are traditional ways, the traditional subsistence and traditional intensive, and then the Green Revolution is moving into more industrial agriculture. And industrial agriculture, the newer Green Revolution methods, keep soil in constant production, unlike the other methods where we just wait for nature to take its course. So keeping soil in constant production requires large amounts of fertilizers to replace all the lost organic matter and nutrients that we've pulled from the soil. The fertilizers contain essential nutrients for plants. Do you remember what the nutrients are? You need to remember the nutrients in fertilizers. Think NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. And they help foster growth. They help with plants with what they need. They meet their needs. So you have organic fertilizers and synthetic fertilizers. Synthetic are also referred to as the inorganic. So organic fertilizers can come from animal manure. And synthetic fertilizers are man-made. Now the things that you would need to know for the test, in addition to knowing these definitions, are the advantages. What are the advantages of fertilizers? What are the advantages of synthetic fertilizers? I mean, if they're out there and we're using them, there has to be some good stuff about them. So they're easy to use. They're highly concentrated. They're perfect in their design, in their recipes, as far as nutrient content based on the plant or the crop that they're used for. What's the downfall of the synthetic fertilizers? Their high concentration is like double deadly when it comes to runoff. Okay, think about the previous slideshow. What type of crop are we looking at? This is monocropping. This is, you're not going to have to recognize what crop this is. You would just have to maybe recognize that it's only one single crop. But just so you know, it's soybean, which is considered a grain, and grains feed more people than beef. Just saying, you got to remember, if you eat lower on the food chain, you're becoming more energy efficient and you're not abusing as much of the land. Okay, so back to the fact that this is monocropping. Make sure you know your definition of monocropping. What are the pros of monocropping? If you want, you can pause this, you can write a list of pros and cons, or you can just keep listening and take some notes for that possible open note question that you have. So the pros of monocropping are, it allows large expanses of land to be planted all at once and harvested all at once, and you can do it all the time. The harvest can be obtained easily and efficiently. It's very easy for me to drive my little tractor all over the place and not have to worry about going in between other crops. Pesticide and fertilizer treatments can be very easily applied to this. So I can just fly over with an airplane that's going to drop the fertilizers on the land. I don't have to worry about other plants that might not need that recipe of fertilizers. And the whole crop has the same needs, so it's really easy to treat. Now, what are the cons of monocropping? It can lead to environmental degradation. How so? Through soil erosion. It makes crops more vulnerable to pests because they have so much of that one food that they like, and their natural predators can lose their habitat or they can't keep up with the number of pests that are doing well. So the natural predators also may lose their habitat from it. Eventually, we lose our nutrient-rich topsoil. So wow, monocropping is not a good thing. What are some of the things that are really, really bad in the monocropping? The application of the pesticides. Because with one crop, we have a whole lot of the same pest that's coming in. So make sure that you know all these words pertaining to pesticides. Know the difference between your pesticides, like insecticide and herbicide. Know the difference between your broad spectrum, which is designed to get many different types of pests, versus your selective pesticide, which only picks on one particular pest and doesn't really impact any of the others. So know the words, know this diagram, and know this cycle. Know that. So this cycle is also called the pesticide treadmill. over time, the pest populations will evolve resistance, and that's what you need to remember. So the farmer has a bunch of plants, one particular crop usually. They develop a pest, the pests start taking over, things aren't going well, the farmer applies a pesticide. When he applies the pesticide, most of the pests die, but some are able to survive because they have a resistant gene. That's why they survive. And then as generations and generations go on, the proportion of the organisms that are more resistant are going to take over the population, and then the farmer is forced to apply pesticide again. This time it might have to be more pesticide, or it'll have to be a stronger pesticide, and eventually the crops are going to get infested again because of more resistance. Now this again, and we keep needing more and more, and we keep getting more and more pests, is called a positive feedback loop. So here are some more pictures to help you understand resistance. If the pesticide is successful in reducing the pest population, then in the next generation, the fraction of resistant individuals in that population will increase. As time goes by, though, resistant individuals are going to make up larger and larger fractions. Take a look at the diagram down here of the total population. Eventually, the pesticide is going to be weaker because the resistance is becoming stronger, and it leads to the need for more and new pesticide treatments. So remember, positive feedback loop, this is the pesticide treadmill. And it's important because humans use pesticides a whole lot. The U.S. actually consumes 33% of the worldwide pesticide use. U.S., 33% of worldwide pesticide use. Okay, we've talked about the story of the eagle and how quite a few years ago, way before you were born, like in the 70s, DDT was banned in the United States. It's a pesticide, and it was banned because it was found to build up over time. If it builds up over time, that's what bioaccumulation is. So read this, bioaccumulation. So DDT is actually a fat-soluble chemical, and it's not easily flushed from the body. So when the eagle gets it in his or her body, it just stays in the body, and it accumulates more and more and more in the fatty tissue. Whenever an organism containing that pesticide is eaten, the chemical is transferred to the consumer, it accumulates, and it builds up. So persistent pesticides, an example of persistent pesticides could be DDT, and that's the type that don't break down for a long time, and they're more likely to accumulate. So we have non-persistent pesticides that might break down within 24 hours after application, but within that 24 hours they killed the pest. And then we have persistent pesticides that linger. They hang out in the environment over very long periods of time, and that can be much more harmful to the food chain, the food web, and the entire ecosystem. And down here is a picture that I stole, as usual, of what happened to the eagle's eggs as a result of that DDT exposure and bioaccumulation. Okay, so pesticides have their strengths and they have their weaknesses. So then scientists started getting fancy with their biological techniques and their biotech techniques, and they were able to genetically engineer organisms and their seeds. So genetic engineering is just basically when farmers are using artificial selection. But we're actually getting into the DNA or into the tissue. And we do that so that we can get the perfect crop. The one that is resistant to the pests that are in the area. The one that is resistant to the weeds in the area. The one that might be more drought tolerant. Or maybe the opposite, the one that might be more flood tolerant. So we're looking for the perfect crop when we're talking about genetic engineering. There's a purpose for doing it. And usually as a result of engineering that perfect crop, we get a higher crop yield, we get better food quality, maybe larger foods, maybe we just get more fruits out of our crop. We don't have to use as many of the pesticides. And if we don't have to use as many of this and we get more out of our crop, then we can actually reduce world hunger, because we're increasing our production. And basically then we're going to increase our profits. So farmers, when they're just doing their form of artificial selection or selective breeding without actually getting involved in the DNA of the organism, let's say that they want a bigger cow, one that produces more milk, Well, they have to go through generations and generations of the right male and female cow making their next generations of cow. They have to wait a long time. So genetic engineering can move along much faster. So here we're looking at tomato plants that were exposed to destructive caterpillars, and the genetically altered plant is the one on the right, the one that's genetically modified, and it shows just a little damage, not nearly the amount that the non-altered plant has. So we can insert genes from let's say useful soil bacteria into a plant. And an example of that is in corn. We actually insert a bacteria that did come from the soil. We inserted it into the corn, and this is called Bt, by the way, and it transfers the traits that make the corn leaves act as an insecticide. So this was a natural bacteria that was found in the soil. It acted as a natural insecticide, and then we inserted it directly into the plant, Bt it's called. So bacteria from soil that we figured out a way to put into the plant, and that helped the plant develop the same resistance to the same insect. We can also grow plants that are resistant to an herbicide, like Roundup, using genetic engineering. So Roundup is something you can buy in stores now everywhere, and we use it to get rid of weeds. So we have seeds out there that are genetically modified for plants that are Roundup ready. They have the Roundup ready gene that makes them resistant to us spraying Roundup on them. So a farmer can spray Roundup all over their crops to get rid of the weeds, and the actual crop that has the genetically modified gene, the Roundup ready gene, won't be affected by the spraying of that herbicide. White rice and golden rice are shown here. Scientists inserted a gene that produces vitamin A into white rice, and the resulting genetically modified rice is called golden rice. It rids the developing countries of malnourishment. So there's no more vitamin A deficiencies just from simply inserting this very important gene that makes the rice produce vitamin A, and that helps with preventing blindness in developing countries. Varieties of corn and soybean have been genetically modified to resist things. Why not tomato plants? Why not develop things that help with malnourishment? So I did steal some pictures because I do think it's important that you understand the pros of genetically modified products as well as the cons. And these are just some things I found on the internet about other people's point of view. You can go to this website and you can find out more on your own if you're just interested in this. But these are basically other people's opinions. Ooh, notice here Sir Paul McCartney. That really is Paul McCartney from the Beatles. If you don't know who the Beatles are, I don't want to hear it. So this is a display here of some of the many concerns about GMOs. So in 2009, FYI, 63% of the corn, 91% of the soybeans, and 71% of the cotton planted in the U.S. came from genetically modified seeds. Some people are concerned about that. They're concerned about the ingestion of genetically modified foods. They think it may be harmful to humans. Although the evidence is a little weak right now, other people disagree. They think it, well, actually, I'll show you the next slide on that. So the use of genetically modified seeds is also supposed to be a concern for biodiversity. There are concerns that they could breed, these plants could breed with wild relatives, and the genes are going to spread to the wild plants, then altering or eliminating the natural plant varieties. And remember, we need a lot of variety. We don't want one species to all have the same traits. So the genetically modified food farmers are told to create these buffers, like, oh, we'll just put some bushes, put a whole bunch of bushes all around the boundary of your crops. Even though bees can pollinate, and they're not going to say, oh, there's the boundary, there's the bushes, we're going to stop there. So that's why a lot of people are still concerned. But farmers are using less crop varieties because they only want the one that is the strongest and that is the most pest resistant, that's going to give them the most bang for their buck. So farmers use less crop varieties, then causing less diversity, then causing extinction of crops because its genetic traits are lost forever. There are no current laws or regulations for GMOs, But if you buy USDA, which is United States Department of Agriculture organic, it is GMO free. It will not have GMOs in it. Okay, so you need to pause this and you need to cover it up and see if you can come up with the advantages and the disadvantages of genetically modified crops. Make sure that you cover it up again and test yourself after you know it. You should definitely know these trade-offs. And then read through it and just think about which ones are most important to you. Which one of the advantages are very important to you? Which one of the disadvantages are very important to you? And where do you stand when you weigh these? Are you against GMOs or do you support the use of GMOs? There's no wrong answer. And then just think about some of this. How would you vote about the labeling of genetically modified foods? Do you think that it should be required? Because right now it's not required. Where do you stand? Okay, so now that we know the harm that can be caused by the use of pesticides, fertilizers, and genetically modified organisms, we have started to discover that it's important that we consider going back to some more old-fashioned techniques in our farming methods. So you need to know a couple of the terms before we talk about it. We have the conventional agriculture, where there's less labor and machinery is used. Okay, so think Green Revolution. Conventional is we don't need as many people on the farm and we use more machinery to help us. And then we have our traditional farming. Traditional farming does not use machinery. And make sure you understand the difference between shifting and nomadic grazing. Okay, so shifting agriculture is, look, where nutrient-poor soils are. Nomadic grazing is also where nutrient-poor soils are. Shifting is planting, grazing, think animals. Okay, this type, the nomadic grazing, this type of agricultural technique is best suitable for soils with low productivity, actually. Nomad, think walking, moving around, never staying in the same place. These traditional methods work. They work. And they work best because of small human populations. When you're trying to feed a large population, they don't work as well. So which type of farming is this? Of that, what we just went over in the last slide. This is traditional shifting agriculture. This forest has been cleared for agriculture, and what you're looking at here is slash and burn. This is more common in locations with a moderately warm climate near the equator. That's where we're talking about. This is where this is typically going to happen, and we already have nutrient-poor soils. So that's where you're going to see this shifting agriculture with the slash and burn. Also common in rainforests, so near the equator. This type of farming involves clearing the land and using it for a few years until the soil is depleted of nutrients. It's common to use a technique called the slash and burn to clear the area and create ashes from the burning of the trees and the bushes. Ashes are rich in potassium, calcium, magnesium, which helps fertilize the soil. Now, this is not a good farming method. The plot usually gets abandoned. Population pressures can cause land to be used too frequently, and it's too frequent to allow for any recovery, and then the land becomes unsuitable, which makes it unsustainable. Now, that slash and burn in the shifting agriculture can happen around the rainforest, but we also from doing that, we can cause some desertification. And desertification is when the soil is degraded by agriculture. And we just can't use it anymore. Now, notice the Sahara Desert right here in this diagram. And notice that we have a very high vulnerability to desertification here. So there is a pattern where the boundaries of the highest vulnerable regions are where there's existing desert. Here's desert. And here's the more vulnerable areas. And think back to the previous slideshow. In a semi-arid environment, dry, nutrient-poor soils can be easily degraded by agriculture to the point where they're no longer productive. And then we're going to start irrigating and drawing from our water, our groundwater, our surface water. Over-irrigation is going to cause salinization, and then the topsoil could be eroded away. because the salinization is going to dry the soil rather than keeping it moist the whole time. And that's another thing that leads to this desertification. So we have to fix what we do. We have to correct this. We have to become more sustainable in our agriculture. We have plenty of food being produced right now to feed the world. There's people starving everywhere. But we're not going to have plenty once we reach that 9 billion mark, or if we use up our soil and it's no longer productive. So I'm going to stop the slideshow here, and I'm going to start the part 3 where we're going to talk about the types of sustainable agricultural techniques that can be employed for us to save our land.